you make your model of the cost of goods sold, make a model instead of the traditional way, make a model where you explicitly show how much is purchased and what the cost of goods, what the sales are, and put this, put the quantity of purchases, the quantity of cost of goods sold in, and then let me just show you kind of what's going to happen. I've got a little graph of the inventories here. If we, this is, let's put it back to the base case. That was our little thing, okay? And then I put two different little methods here. If we now switch it to a slow rebound case, right now, if we do it correctly, the inventories actually go up for a while, and then you gradually use all the inventories and they kind of come back to the regular level. If you did it incorrectly and you said inventories are just going to go down when the cost of goods sold is down, you're going to understate the inventory and overstate the cost cash flow. Those are the kind of things you can see, and I hope you can see that. More importantly, excuse me for going back and forth here, I hope you can see, just get some ideas. Let's go to the admin cost. You want to explicitly show how much fixed and variable cost you are, and no company's going to report that. You're going to have to do some estimation. And when you are able to model fixed and variable costs in a separate kind of way, then if I go from my, let's go back to the kind of no virus case, which is your benchmark case, which gave a valuation similar to what you had originally. I should have fixed this a little bit. Then when we go to a problem case, when we lose all our sales, if everything was variable, can you see, if I'm looking at these valuations, can you see how the valuation goes up? If everything was fixed, then the valuation will go down. This is a very important kind of thing. And what it really means, I shouldn't say it like this, but it really means, are you firing all your employees? That now, and you can do this with a whole bunch of things. Now, you might be saying, you kook, you old idiot, why are you doing this? If you put all of these stupid little spinner boxes in, you can't remember what you started with. Well, that's wrong. What you can do is create one of these things, and these things reset all the spinner boxes. Now, I'm not going through that in great detail, but when we go through this, you have to make kind of your standard line with an index function. And then in addition to that, now I've got videos that explain this, or you can take the file and figure out kind of how I did it. You have to write a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of VBA code to correct that, but it's an important kind of thing. So you can make a good presentation. You can imagine all sorts of presentations you could do with this. All right, there's one other kind of issue I want to just address very quickly, and that's the issue of capital expenditures. When you have let's again put it back to a no virus case. When you have a no virus case, and I made a little thing here, and you assume, then we go back from our no virus case to our rebound case. If you would assume that the CapEx are really low, well, the impact wouldn't be very much, because you cut some CapEx and your cash flow goes up. And when your cash flow goes up, when you make your discounted cash flow analysis, it won't show a big impact. You've got to be so careful with that, because then if you say, oh no, if I'm going to assume I got a rebound and my company comes back to where it was, I better make up those CapEx. And then can you see the effect on the values? I'm looking at these values up here. Okay, those are just a couple of points. And then very quickly, you can look at different ways of modeling the terminal value, and you better be really, really careful when you do this to not put your terminal value before your crisis is kind of completely over. So you better make your model really flexible so you can put a different explicit cash flow period and a terminal cash flow period. Now, the terminal cash flow period, the thing I recommend, and it's just in the model, is to use a value driver formula rather than the old-fashioned Gordon method and the rest. And I think that's enough. So Hasim, I think maybe now it might be time for a little break, and then we'll go into the corporate modeling. I mean, excuse me, the project finance modeling.
All right. So anybody who has the questions to be asked, he can raise the question, raise the hands, and I will be taking the questions one by one. Or you may just post your questions in the chat box.
Well, Hasim, if nobody has questions, should we just proceed?
Yes, there's one question. Can you, Mr. Mohammad Tahir Saeed has asked, can you please guide us how to do all this stuff?
Oh, great. What a good question. What a good question. So I have for years, I've written this very, very exciting novel. Not a novel, it's a book called Project and Corporate Modeling. And if you send your emails, what we'll do is, of course, we're doing this for a little marketing. The best thing to do is to take a little class. But if you don't have time and really want to do a little bit yourself, we'll give you some of the, we'll show you where to get the book. We'll also, I've got about 600 videos on a website that go through some of the mechanics of this. Okay, so the question was really very good, and that shows you that, and it's a wonderful question, and I didn't explain it well enough. These things like that, coloring the sheet, that's all there. Okay.
All right. Mr. Mohammad Salman has asked, how do we model termination value for COVID-19 effect if our cutoff date for valuation is, say, December 31, 2019?
Well, I just, the only way I would suggest, number one, that you really make your models more flexible, and you almost have to make them longer term. If you don't do that, you can, I'm going to switch to my slides again, and it's a fantastic way to do this. If you just would use a cash flow for your terminal value, if you use a cash flow like this, just growing the cash flow at the end of the period, that's very, very dangerous. You just can't do that. What you can do is use this thing called the value driver formula. And the value driver formula, unfortunately, I did put it in the model, but you take 1 minus, you have to put in, you have to just use the invested capital the company has at the terminal value, take that invested capital, multiply it by what you think the long-term stable return is going to be, and then use this formula. It's 1 minus the growth rate divided by the return on invested capital divided by the WACC minus the growth rate. Now, I could spend hours on this, but I'm just saying that's a fascinating question, because it's certainly, you certainly want to assume a more stable kind of thing. My son said, oh my God, what's going to happen to this Marriott company? They're going to be disastrous, which they are. But, and I'm using too many American companies, and I'm not even American, I'm sorry. But when you think about that company, they might have a really bad year, but their hotels last 60 years, 100 years. Their hotels, or an airplane company with planes of 20, 30 years. You've got to be very careful to not overstate the decline in cash flow for a couple of years. And that's why I say if you use a really high WACC, which is a dangerous thing, you're going to overvalue the short-term cash flows and not put enough value really on the terminal cash flows.
Okay, so Mr. Hari Ganesh Muralidharan asked, can you please briefly explain the value driver terminal value computation that you were recommending in place of Gordon's?
Oh, certainly. Okay, for that, I think I'm going to open another file, the file again. Okay. And again, what we're going to do is we're going to give you the file. So the thing I would really recommend you do is work through these. So I put 4 different terminal value calculations in. Here is the formula. I put it up here. So what you need to do in this formula, it's called the 3, instead of just using the WACC and the growth rate, you also reflect what you think the return of the company is going to be in the long run. Now there's this book called by McKinsey who really touts this formula, and I think they're full of crap. I'm really being asinine about it. Sorry, I shouldn't. Oh, sorry, difficult about this. They go too far on this. I put 2 different methods here, and the best I can do right now is just take this file and let you look at it. But basically, instead of a simple growth rate formula up here where you take 1 plus the growth rate divided by the WACC minus the growth rate, you get a little more sophisticated and also include what return the company is going to make, and you base that on the invested capital rather than only the short-term cash flows. Okay, I probably didn't answer that very well, but just a little introduction.
I think these were the questions. One more question. Can you please share the name of the website with all your videos uploaded?
Oh,
so I think we will be. Yeah. So please carry on, Ed.
Well, my name's Ed Bodmer, and that's my website name. So that's it. Okay.
All right. So I think these were the questions. You can carry on with the rest of the session.
Oh, thank you. Oh, for me, this is hard. And now I'm going to go to project finance because I noticed that some people were, and this is really, now, can you, Hasim, is the screen sharing okay still?
Yeah, please.
Yeah,
okay.
The
screen has started to share.
To more the project finance for a single investment. If you're not used to looking at project finance, that's fine. Just think of, for now, just think of the financing of 1 airplane, 1 electricity plant, 1 hospital, 1 road, and these sorts of things. And now I'm going to really get into, in project finance, the banking side. How do we measure the credit? And again, I'll use this example of a hotel that may last 60 years. And if you have 2 bad years, you might default. That's fine. But you want to know how much room you have for restructuring that default. So that's really the issues we'll go through in this project finance section. Okay, so what we're going to do is, again, go through some issues and how the kind of crisis can affect project finance, how to add scenarios to this in the same kind of way, but there are going to be a little bit differences. And then I'm going to go crazy on using a ratio that a lot of people don't even look at. It's called the project life coverage ratio. People look at this thing called the debt service coverage ratio. We'll look at another one, and that shows you how much potential you have for restructuring the loan. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about cash sweeps. Okay, this is much more about lending. And then again, I'll show you some of the modeling mechanics. So I hope to show you the same kind of things. Now, here's what could happen if you have a road or a railway, an airport. People aren't driving as much, and people certainly aren't going to the airport. And if your airport cash flows depend on your volumes, that could be a disaster. Of course, it's a lot worse if you have an oil price project that's indirectly or directly related to the oil price. You could have a delay in construction. I know there are big construction projects in the region, and I think they're probably stopped right now. And so we're going to have delays. And there's another fascinating question that I don't know the answer to. If you do have delays, are you going to charge that to the contracting company, the EPC company, or are you going to charge that to the project itself? And if somebody's giving you kind of a fixed price for a project, a nice, this could be an electricity project, well, that's all very good. But if that off-taker, that's called the off-taker, who's paying for this, if they run out of money, they're not going to pay you. So there are all sorts of problems. And I already kind of mentioned that anytime we look at a corporation, you can think of that as a portfolio of assets. Now I go crazy with project finance, and I put these little spinner buttons in, and I say, okay, here's the off-taker, and here's the EPC contractor, and what happens if you change this, and I do all my spinner boxes. I try to look at things a little bit differently, and then I try to show, here's how much cash flow you have, and we'll talk about the DSCR. The DSCR is how much cash flow you have compared to how much debt money you're paying back to the bank, debt service. We want a buffer. Now, here's could be some other examples. I just picked this off the internet today. This is what happened in 2008. You have a big dip and a rebound. That's the sort of thing we want to model. Here's what happened to the oil price. You all know that. I don't think it has today's decline in here too. What a disaster. What's more interesting for me is the gas price. And there's another file you can get. You can pick it right off the website. It's a file that collects all the commodity price data. If you just want to do this yourself. And this is the price of natural gas in Europe that's had a more dramatic decline almost than the price of oil because of all the competition. And the really interesting thing is all this shale gas. Here's the gas price in the US. It used to be so much lower than in Europe, and it's converged. So we want to model some of these, and I'm going to illustrate this with a kind of pretend project. I'm going to make a solar model, and I'm going to see what happens to the cash flow. And then what we're going to do, which people don't normally do in project finance models, is they don't admit that there can be a default. But you want to model a default, and you want to model when you have a default, how is that default going to be repaid? And then we're going to show you how to model use this project life coverage ratio to see how you can restructure. So the first thing is kind of going through some scenario analysis. And let me just open this project finance model for a minute. I'm going to close a corporate model that you'll receive from my friend Hassam. You can't get that from the website. You can only get it from Hassam, these models, okay? Because I just made these only for you, and I'm going to make a solar model, and then it's the same kind of thing. Let me just illustrate kind of how this works. So I pretended there was a big price decline from the natural gas and the electricity price, and I showed you kind of how to model a capacity factor. And this is this big graph of the cash flow compared to the debt service. This is what you want to see in a project finance model, and a lot of the concepts that I just showed you before would be just kind of the same. Now let's model a decline. So the first thing I do is I size the debt. And then I say, okay, well, let's fix the amount of debt we just computed. I'm doing this kind of without explaining it a little bit. And then instead of this, let's apply a crisis. Let's assume a crisis happens. And when a crisis happens, here's what you want to do. You want to model the decline, and then you want to show, oh, this is a default. We're going to have to repay the default. And do we have enough room to repay the default? And I'm running out tiny little bit of time. But if, I'm going to put another variable in here, if things get really bad and the price never comes back, then you can see, just how low can the price go? And then if the price goes low enough, right there, here, I'm trying to repay the default. I've defaulted over here and I'm trying to repay it. And if it gets all the way down to here, this is just like a sensitivity factor. Oops, I can't repay the debt. And this project life coverage ratio which I'll explain in a minute, is just exactly one when you cannot repay all the debt. That's why you can go backwards and kind of look at a ratio that isn't commonly looked at, perhaps. I'm going to put it back to the base case, take away the crisis assumptions, and it's the same sort of thing. So what I did here is kind of a lot of standard project finance modeling where we have to put all of the date inputs in, and we have to be really careful in sculpting, doing this thing called sculpting the debt. I just did a standard kind of thing. I need to color the sheet again. That's from this file that you'll all get. I hope somebody in the world uses this because I've wasted so much time making that, and that shows you exactly kind of which are the inputs and where they're coming from. And then we make our scenarios. And in our scenarios, what we want to be really careful with is putting in these price declines and using alternative kind of scenarios. This would be an extreme case, and this would be, oh no, this would be our base decline case. And then we have to think, how fast will the oil price rebound and what will happen? Now, so what you can do then is I think I'll apply the crisis assumptions, and then we can put different kind of scenario analysis when we recognize really what's that we don't know everything about the world, and things are kind of uncertain. Oops, I went to the wrong thing. So let me just explain a couple of other ideas. This is just modeling downside cases. I've really done this. Again, you're going to use the input index function and make some of these little tools. Another thing that's really going to be important in the project finance is to be able to take a model you have that's probably a semi-annual model and convert it, at least over this crisis period, into a monthly model. And in order to do that, again, I won't be able to, I don't have time to go through all the details and walk you through them, but we have to kind of make a month by month analysis. I need to do my little coloring again. You're probably very irritated at me for doing all this coloring all the time, but I'm doing it on purpose so you can see the kind of tools you have. And then the coloring thing shows you when you have a true and a false flag and what we're going to do in the different months. And we want to put different prices in, even if it's a semi-annual model. Again, it's the same sort of theme. It's the same sort of theme that you've got to be able to make your models flexible and make them so you can put some monthly data in. And what you do next is excuse me, go down and put the kind of price declines in here, and I'm still in the year 2017. So in these years, you got these big price declines, and you've got to reflect that in your model. Okay, and now let me go back to the PowerPoints just for a minute. Okay, and here's what, just now let's just go through a couple of ideas. If you're going to use a debt service coverage ratio, cash flow available for debt service divided by debt service, the amount of cash flow reduction you can have, the percentage of cash flow reduction is measured by the DSCR minus 1 divided by the DSCR. What that means, let me explain that. So if you have an oil price project, upstream oil project, and you want to see how much can the oil price or the cash flows that result from the oil price go down. If you have a DSCR, cash flow divided by debt service, of 2 times as much cash flow as you have debt service, 200 of cash flow divided by 100 of debt service, well then the cash flow can go down from 200 to 100 and you can still pay off the debt. The DSCR was 2 in my example, 200 divided by 100. But 200, if you take 100 over the 200, that's a 50% decline. You can take the DSCR, which is 2 minus 1 gives you 1, divided by 2, that's your 50% decline. That's what the DSCR measures. You can kind of go backwards and figure out what DSCR you need for a certain cash flow reduction. But that's not very useful because we're probably going to default now. Everybody's going to have a problem. And what you might want to use this, there's something called the LLCR, which is the present value of the cash flow over the loan life. I'm doing this way too quickly, divided by the debt. But that LLCR measures how much the cash flow can go down over the life of the loan. The real issue is the project life coverage, which measures how much room do we have at the end of the life in order to pay off the loan. It measures the value of this tail, okay? And that shows you, I just go through a little bit of the project life, and I assume, Hassam, you're gonna give them these PowerPoint slides so you can kind of look at it. And one other thing that's gonna happen, it happened after 2008, and I know we have a lot of nice bankers in the room, and I was a banker a very, very long time ago, and they start to love cash flow sweeps. Here's what happens. Can you imagine what bankers hate? Before the crisis, everybody's paying out a dividend. And then the company defaults. And then they say, I can't repay the debt. So you have paid yourself a dividend and then defaulted. How that would upset you. Let's fix this with a cash flow sweep. You're not allowed to pay the dividend until we pay off the debt. That's kind of how the sweep looks like, and it's got a lot of problems. And I'm just going to show you the cash sweep for a minute, and then I think I'm going to be finished. And here's how the cash sweep works. Again, it illustrates how we can use this. Now I better take away the crisis assumptions. I better switch it back. I think I've got everything in the base case scenario. And here's the way a cash sweep would work. I'm going to put in and I'm going to sweep a whole bunch. When I sweep the cash flow, here's what happens. You don't get to pay a dividend, and this is early debt repayment. Can you see that? So when you make it go down, you can see that the debt is longer. And again, one of the most important things here is just presenting this, presenting the different scenarios, showing what the effects. If you look at this, look at what happens to the IRR and the equity when you change and you put a cash sweep in. You can see why people would hate that. Okay, but now let's apply the crisis assumption. And now let's first do it without a cash sweep. You can kind of see what's going to happen. Without a cash sweep, and I'm going to put a little more of a downside case in here. This is kind of stressful here. So right now, if we put a really low case in, eventually here, we can't pay off the debt. Our PLCR goes down to 1. I'm going through some things that are reasonably sophisticated, okay? If we put a big cash sweep in here, oh, that didn't work because, excuse me, that was a bad example. I should have practiced this a little bit more, okay? If we put a cash sweep in here, you see you're getting some money ahead of time before the crisis, and that's helping you alleviate the crisis. Not that really, but that's I think what's going to happen. And then you can look at the financing part of the model and look at two kind of really key things in the financing part of the model, and that is how to model a default. You make a little cash flow waterfall, and it's not so complicated. You model a default with a maximum statement and the repayment with a minimum and a maximum statement. And you model the sweep is a tiny little bit more complicated, but basically it's a max-min statement, okay? And you can take and look at some of these formulas in the model, or Hasim will tell you how you can even come to a class or something like that. All right, and I think I've got 2 minutes left, so I think, Hasim, I'll stop.
So can we have some questions, Ed?
Oh, sure, sure.
Okay. So I just received a question. Can you please share the website URL where all your videos are available? We will be sharing that.
Okay.
Um,
Actually, it looks, it's not a very professional looking website, but it's got all these. So it's got a whole lot of things on project finance, and then a whole lot of things on corporate finance, and okay, if you look at any one of these, you'll find the videos and all that. Okay, go ahead, Asim. Sorry.
yeah. So this was the question. We can address these questions later on.
Okay.
I think you should proceed with the program because nobody has asked any other question.
Okay. Wonderful.
All right.
Well, I hope everybody has a very nice day. Now, I was supposed to stop sharing so we can get everybody's picture or something. I stopped sharing. A screenshot.
Yeah, it has been taken. So,
Okay.
Ed, if you have just finished now, I would like to thank all the participants, and I really value their time. They have come here, and I'm sure they have had some learning out of the question, out of the session. I sincerely thank you, Ed, for coming up online at the midnight hour, especially to conduct this webinar and help our participants to learn something very useful. I'm sure that, I mean, everyone knows that the things that are coming after the COVID is going to be very, very uncertain. And if someone who can actually project or who can actually, anticipate that, he would be a very, very valuable or something. It's in other words, it's very impossible, I can say. So, but still, your webinar session has made some of the projections, some of the formulas I have introduced, so which people can actually see some of the things coming up. So once again, thank you for your time, and thank you everyone for joining the session. You will be provided the website link and the presentations and the other details which Ed Bodman has shared. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Okay, thank you. It was a big honor. Made me nervous. It's my first webinar ever. Okay, thank you very much for asking too. Okay, goodbye.
Thank you. Bye bye.